Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we are going to introduce you again to Doug Hershey, who has put together Israel Rising, celebrating 70 years, 1948 to 2018, Ancient Prophecy, Modern Lens, The Land of Israel Awakens, really reawakens. This pictorial view comparing side-by-side pictures of 70-year-old pictures of Israel compared to today. Doug is an author, conference speaker, and founder of Ezra Adventures, an Israel-focused travel and education company from years of hands-on experience, cultivating local relationships in Israel and a love for history. He provides a unique perspective on the Jewish scriptures in present-day Israel. He's based out of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. When he is not in Israel with Ezra Adventures, he's speaking in churches and synagogues. For more information, you can visit him at EzraAdventures.com. Doug, welcome back to the program. Doug, can you hear me?
Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. I want to make sure you could hear me. We got sound loud and clear on your end?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. Also included in this bundle is a calendar, which is the biblical calendar going all the way from 2018 to 2019, and through City of Peace out of Nashville, our good friends at Galilee of the Nations and City of Peace, along with the Beautiful Land Initiative, have put together wonderful music to go along as you listen to the music and open the book. It's a wonderful book, sits on my coffee table. Quite an extraordinary work. When you were on last, we talked a lot about the motivation, what it was that you saw, what captured you by this, how you did this by helicopter, not by drone, and what an incredible experience it was for you. But actually today I wanted to kind of investigate the prophetic side of all this as to where we stand with the landscape of Israel today, what's going on geopolitically with Gaza. Unfortunately, people think the West Bank is not Israel, and it's a Palestinian, and it's Judean Samaria. And it is a mixed populated area.
Yeah, absolutely right. The Judea and Samaria is the biblical heartland of Israel. There's where 80% of the Bible happened there, and what people don't realize is really since 1967, when Israel reclaimed that after Jordan attacked in the Six-Day War, from that time up until the Oslo Accords in the mid-1990s, it was the fourth fastest growing economy on earth. And all of that, again, when we talk about the land reviving, the land coming back and responding to Israeli sovereignty, even things like standard of living, economy, financial value, all of that is also responding as well.
Since we talked, I had been to Israel, went on June 1st, came back on June 10th, had the opportunity to go see the embassy, got our pictures taken there in front of the big seal. Of course, you can't go in, and you can't take photographs outside the building except for the seal. So security is quite noticeable. How significant is it from a prophetic standpoint in your mind that we have opened our embassy there in Jerusalem?
I apologize, I missed your last question. How significant
is the opening of the embassy in Jerusalem?
It's in my mind, it's as significant as the United States recognizing or being the first nation to recognize Israel when they became a nation. I mean, it's simply just verifying and recognizing what the Bible has said all along, which is that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. And as you well know, all nations are going to be coming to Jerusalem to worship the King at some point. So not only is it sort of an Israeli capital city, but eventually it'll be the capital of the world, really, where there'll be a seated king where all nations will come. And so I always joke to people about taking people to Israel. It's like we're all going to Jerusalem eventually. It's just, when you go now, we're getting ahead of the curve. And so I think for the United States to recognize that, as there's been many other nations, Honduras, Guatemala, there's some in Eastern Europe that are now starting to follow suit and starting to go through the process as well. I think we can expect just some profound biblical blessings coming out of that, just simply because we're recognizing what God has already put in place, and what God is doing in the region.
Prophetically, Israel is the spiritual capital of the world. Jerusalem is the spiritual capital of the world. It is the epicenter of everything that's biblical,
Yes.
both what was, what is, and what is to come. Why do you think that, aside from the obvious deception of Satan, blinding Christians' views of the importance and significance of Israel, especially in the North American church, where there's the BDS movement and many churches who are divorcing themselves, or, as they say, unhitching themselves from the Old Testament?
Yeah.
How do you perceive all of this?
For those that I think that have an eye towards Israel, that are not only have a recognition of it, but are following their scriptures. I mean, much of what's happening right now um, is unfolding in our day in a way that hasn't really since these prophets spoke it 2,600 years ago. And so, Ezekiel 5:5 talks about that God has placed Jerusalem in the center of the earth. And if that is the place where the Messiah is returning to as well, for those, we'll just talk about churches. For the churches that simply don't have a focus on Israel, they're going to become more and more sort of out of touch of what God is really doing in the earth. When those that are paying attention, or at least simply just reading their Bibles, we were just talking just before going on air about the amount of believers that are coming from the Far East, from Japan and China and Korea, and Indonesia and Malaysia, some of these places where, in the underground churches there, they don't have anything really to read but the Bible, and they're all coming to the same conclusion: is that God is doing something in the earth. Israel is reestablished as a nation, and they want to come be a part of it. And so, for me, for the churches and the organizations that are recognizing the time and the season we're in, especially regarding to Israel, we have a time not just simply to watch what God is doing in the earth, but to actively be a part of it. And for the churches or organizations that are saying, well, the Old Testament isn't valuable anymore, we're in the new age of grace, or whatever however they explain it away. In my mind, they're becoming more and more just simply out of touch with this profound opportunity that's happening in our day in Israel. But not only just simply to have something to be involved with, but believers today, we have an opportunity to literally fulfill the pages of the scriptures in a way that our parents or grandparents would have never dreamed. And so I think that, again, if we're following the pattern of Bible prophecy, and that God is regathering Israel, He's bringing everybody back to the land that He promised. Jerusalem is becoming a significant place again. The physical land is responding. The Messiah is coming to Jerusalem to set up His kingdom. It's not New York or London or Hong Kong or any of these other places. And again, with what God is doing literally on earth as it is in heaven, this was His heart and His intention. And when we have an eye towards Israel, even just in its most elementary form, we're just opening ourselves not only to receive in a blessing, but simply just walk in just profound aspect of Bible prophecy and be a part of what God is doing in the earth right now.
You take I would put Ezra Adventures into the boutique kind of group, where it is not just touring, it is fully engaged, kind of an immersion into the culture, society, and ministries that are operating in Israel, while still touring and seeing the important sites. How has this changed your Gentile church view of what is really happening in the land?
Yeah, it's changed it dramatically. One of the most things, again, talking personally, one of the most profound changes I've seen in my own life over the last 10, 15, 20 years of being in the land and watching the land is responding, is I've become very much of a realist and a literalist when it comes to Bible prophecy. While there's an aspect of spiritualism and allegorical, or some metaphor in there, the deserts are blooming exactly as they said. The waste and forgotten cities are being rebuilt. God is regathering His people from the four corners of the earth. These are like, in the scope of human history, these are human anomalies. I mean, this just doesn't happen. And so for me, when I'm reading the Bible and what I'm passing on to my groups when we're going with Ezra Adventures is simply that, is that for those that say that God is done with Israel, my comment is like, well, let's go have that discussion in one of the waste and forgotten cities that have been rebuilt. Let's go have a coffee and talk about it in Jerusalem, which was 150 years ago was a dump. Or let's go have lunch at the wineries that have just been replanted in the last 20 years that Jeremiah prophesied about 2,600 years ago. So for me, I've become very much of a realist, and I joke about it sort of a tongue-in-cheek sort of way when I'm speaking. It's almost like God meant exactly what He said. It's almost like He's doing exactly what He said, and we can believe His words. And as you well know, we certainly can. But to me, just being involved in Israel and taking groups and introducing people to sort of the real Israel of what's happening, not only with the nation, but also with the believers and some of the revival things that are beginning to happen there, and some of the awakening in the Jewish people. All of this is very clearly laid out in the Bible, and it's happening exactly as He said. So, it's, in my mind, it's while people talk about the Bible being in living color when you go to Israel and reading the Bible differently, all of that is true. But I think one of the most significant aspects is that much of what we thought was metaphor or allegorical or spiritual, we're finding in the last 50 years it's literal, it's tangible, and it's happening exactly as the Lord said it would.
As you look at prophecy, sometimes God didn't prophesy just about the people, but a lot of His prophecy is about the land. Speak to the
Yes.
mountains of Israel. Speak to the fields of Israel. As we look at really, Ezekiel 36:6, it's a prophecy not to people or kings, but to the land of Israel. Speak to the mountains and the hills, to the ravines and the valleys, that it will put forth fruit. Man and beast will be multiplied on it. The waste cities will be rebuilt when His people Israel return to the land. So here's a piece of property that has changed hands. My history is a country called Galicia. Changed hands hundreds of times. If you ask the average person, where's the country of Galicia, they wouldn't know that it only existed for 40 years. It was southern Poland, western Ukraine, and it's the place in which in 1904 the city of Anatevka, the story of Fiddler on the Roof, is taken from within the borders of the country of Galicia. This was the Jewish life of the shtetls and in this particular area. But we were a pawn and changed hands many, many times. My grandfather just happened to be born there, and my great-grandparents were from there, and so I know about Galicia. So
so does that make you a Galician, or what do you call people from Galicia?
Galiciano.
Galiciano, excellent.
Yeah, Galiciano. And so as a Galiciano, we're a unique group of people, because then when they would come after World War I, Galicia wasn't listed as a country. It was either Austria, Poland, or at that time Russia or Ukraine, depending on how detailed you wanted to get. But Soviet Union was really the nomenclature. So I have one of the few sets of papers that says Galicia as being the country of origin. But as he grew older, it was always Austria, because that was more acceptable than southern Poland. Your trips, you small bus, not the big 50-person, 55-person bus I take, but you take a smaller bus, and you do more things along the way than tour. What have you found over the years that has been profound for you from an experience perspective, not just from an observation perspective?
One of the most dramatic things I really love about the land, and I tell my groups this, and really anybody who asks it, is that in the Middle East, relationship is the currency. So you can have large ministries come in that want to do, all sorts of, events or larger events or shows or whatever, and bring in a lot of money and spend it, and it's great. And I suppose they're effective on whatever level that they can be. But after the money runs out, they go home. And what I found is that when you take time with the people and you sit down, you have a cup of coffee, and you talk about the family and the weather and what life is like in Israel, that doors really begin to open up. And I say all that to say is that the believers that are second and third generation believers in the land are really finding their own. So one of the most exciting things that I enjoy taking my groups to are things like the Beautiful Land Initiative that started by a young Messianic guy who's just wanting to clean up the land. He's wanting to get involved. And now the city of Tiberias, I mean, he's making a name for himself. He's in on city council meetings. They're thrilled to have him not only spearheading that for tourist groups coming in, but now he's getting into schools, and they're talking about cultural change with the litter problem in Israel. Other organizations that are starting to come up are working with Holocaust survivors, and these are young Israelis in there, and I say young like in their late 20s, early 30s, even early.
You're speaking of my spiritual son and my spiritual
Exactly.
daughter and my spiritual grandchildren when you talk about the
course.
Beautiful Land Initiative.
Of course, and there's many with Jordan. There's many that are like him, that are that are close friends. But what's neat about it is that where first generation believers in Israel really struggled to find their way, and struggled just to meet and to pray and to kind of keep their head above water, and feeling lonely in the military. Now these second and third generation believers are growing in the land, are growing in the faith of their literally of their fathers, of their parents, and are not only surviving, but they're beginning to thrive, and they're beginning to be an active part in society. And to me, when I'm bringing groups from the outside, when we have or from the nations, when we have opportunity just to have dinner with these guys, and to pick up trash with Jordan around the Sea of Galilee, or when we're working with Holocaust survivors that are set up by close friends that have a heart for this generation, that's of founders of the state of Israel that are dying off, and you see sort of their heart on their sleeve and their love for Yeshua, and wanting that to pass that on to Holocaust survivors in love and honor. It's something that, to me, when the Bible talks about a remnant, and a remnant being restored and coming back to life and bringing dead things to life, all of these, again, we talk about metaphors, all of these sort of symbolic things. It's very literal and very tangible. And these people now have names and lives and families, and they're growing and becoming very fruitful. And it's one of the things I really enjoy about bringing small groups, is with smaller groups like that, we're able to have dinner, we're able to sit down and hear some of the stories. And again, we talk about currency being the Middle East, is just sort of sharing some of that currency, and on a personal level, to be able just to encourage guys like Jordan, or some of my other friends of Chaim or Joshua or Gilad, or some of these good guys. Just living in the land is hard, and so I want to bring life and encouragement, and get behind and support what they're doing, and it's exciting to be a part of, because they really are beginning to change the nation as they're living there, raising their families, and thriving as Messianic believers.
I think one of the greatest misconceptions, and I take on my trips 75% first timers. I have regular people who travel with me 4, 5, 6, 7, even 8 times. If I go, they'll go with me, just because we build lasting relationships and they love the land. And there's you have those as well that are repeat visitors. But what they see with their eyes, I'll give you the Korach family. Here's a Muslim family. They sell scarves, hats. They're at Ramot Rachel. They're at the Palm Sunday walk as you're walking down. You probably recognize the boys. I've known them since their dad brought them, and they were little, and watched them grow up to become husbands and fathers, and have been blessed by this family, had coffee with this family, and so when we see each other, it's like and this is a Muslim, Israeli Muslim family.
Yes.
They're Israeli citizens, they're Muslim, but they're Israelis. And so young Muhammad that's been coming on my bus since he was 13 years old, he's 33 now. He used to sell candy bars right outside the Garden Tomb. You may run into Muhammad every time you come, but I knew him when he was 13, right when his father was a drummer at the YMCA. And then he passed away, and Muhammad became kind of like at 16, he kind of had to take over the family. And all of a sudden you build these relationships, and people look out and they hear the cry of my name, and people coming running and throwing their arms around me. The people that take your picture on the Mount of Olives. The father, when he was in the hospital, he had a heart attack. I got word from Israel, and I sent him a card and a gift to the hotel, to the hospital. When he saw me, he said, "Do you know of all the rabbis in Israel, you're the only rabbi that reached out to me?" And I said, "You and I have been friends for years. You've been taking my group pictures for years. How could I not remember you?" And you build that lasting connection. People say, "But he's not Jewish. He's your enemy." No, he is not my enemy. That is the media that's made him my enemy. Muslims, Christians, and Jews, Ethiopians, Russians, Lemba, from every walk of life, who walk to school holding hands, 5 kids across, every different background, Arab Christian, Arab Muslim, Jewish, Messianic, all holding hands. They don't have a problem. They don't have an issue. The issue is so man-made, and it's government that's caused all of this, that you and I don't perceive any of that in the land, and we have as many joyful Muslim relationships. There's a store that I go to that's a Muslim family that would carry me in a chair. If I said to them, "Bring me in a chair," they would get the whole family together and lift me up and bring me in a chair, because we have that much history and that much love together. People have no idea of the closeness of Middle Eastern relationship, the breaking of bread, the fellowship, this red alert that's going on in Gaza now, which is over and over and over again, the media only wants to focus on. The love that goes on with, what are the numbers? There are 4.5 million Israeli Jewish citizens. There are, 1.5 million, 2 million Arab Israeli citizens?
Yeah, I believe so. I want to say it's under 30% of the population that are Arab.
Okay, so you have 43% I know is Jewish. So then you have about 30% that is Arab, Israeli. They live under the Israeli, they go to the Israeli schools, they live under the Israeli government, they have seats in the Knesset, they have representation for their own needs. They're not Palestinians. They haven't divorced themselves from. And we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, I want to talk about that, because most people don't realize that in 1948, citizenship was offered to every pair of feet that had their feet on the soil of the land of Israel. Citizenship was offered to them. Let's clear up some of the very common misconceptions, lies, deceptions, and distortions, and let you and I, who are both very, very fluent in life in Israel, let's clear that up for people so they understand a little bit more why the prophecies are still unfolding and who the people are that are impacted by them. We're talking with Doug Hershey, who has put together this incredible pictorial view with photographer Elise Theriault. Ancient Prophecy, Modern Lens, Israel Rising, The Land of Israel Reawakens, celebrating 70 years of Israel. It's an incredible book of just the most amazing pictures of the before and after of the 70 years since the independence of Israel, and the accompanying calendar and musical CD. You can find all of that at, you can go to, what's the website, IsraelRising.com?
The best place for all of it really is EzraAdventures.com.
Okay, EzraAdventures.com.
You can find Israel Rising on Amazon, but for the calendar and the CD or the whole bundle, EzraAdventures.com is the best place for that.
Sounds great. All right, we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk more about Israel with Doug Hershey. We'll be right back. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation and host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth, seen live every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time at www.ianbn.com, and then replayed throughout the day and night via our website. All of our segments can be seen on the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel. Since our launch in January of this year, we've expanded our global reach to over 54 countries with a social media following of over 125,000. Our commitment is to bring you the most in-depth interviews with authors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders from around the world. We have interviewed guests from Israel, Brazil, England, India, and all across North America. All of our authors are featured on the Books and Media page on our website, www.ianbn.com. There you can find a direct link to the book you want to order, and we receive a small commission directly from Amazon. There is no cost to you for this service. In addition to our daily teachings and interviews, we make available to you the archive of all of the interviews on our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels. Our live program is available from our homepage, and there is never a charge to you for any of this access. We made the decision long ago that we would remain a commercial-free resource that would not be influenced by any pressure from any outside company. There are only two ways that we are able to continue to operate this ministry and provide you with the only live 4-hour daily Christian television talk show program. The first is through your support and tax-deductible contributions to Igniting a Nation. These can be made directly through the donate button on the website or sent through the mail to Igniting a Nation, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. The other way we support the program is by offering you a unique opportunity to have access to over 10 years worth of teachings on a subscription basis. The teaching archives contains all of my prior sermons, Torah studies, prophecy in the news videos, and much more for the low subscription price of $5 per month. This subscription grants you unlimited access to over 800 hours of content not available elsewhere and is updated weekly with the most current prophecy classes. In addition to 20 hours of original TV programming each weekday, we invite you to join us live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings for our Prophecy in the News classes. The times and locations are listed on our events page on the website www.ianbn.com. Every day, you and I are faced with the challenge of where we will go to hear the truth. We are committed to bring you the only program of its kind that covers the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. We cannot do this without your support. Since we launched on January 5th, 2017, we have aired over 300 individual teachings, interviews, and commentaries not available anywhere else. We are now working side by side with almost every major Christian publishing house to bring you the most in-depth feature interviews possible. Our 1-hour features address every subject that affects the believer's life. We are hearing of salvations from the Middle East, Africa, and all across the United States. Lives are being changed every day, and we have only just begun. Our mission is to become your trusted resource and grant you access to the people, tools, and information you need to grow in your relationship with the Lord. You can help us by liking us on social media and through your financial support. We know you have many choices in who you support, but we are prayerfully asking you to consider helping us keep revealing the truth, true to our calling, to cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth like no other program available. Donate today and help us bring the message to the four corners of the earth. Visit www.ianbn.com and donate, buy a book, or subscribe to our teaching archives. Without you, we do not exist. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Doug Hershey, author of Israel Rising, The Land of Israel Reawakened, celebrating 70 years, 1948 to 2018, Ancient Prophecy, Modern Lens, a pictorial book that takes you on a journey from what Israel looked like 70 years ago and actually recreating the same shots as best they possibly could into modern day full color to show you the dramatic change in the land. And it's not just because the land has changed, it's because prophecy is unfolding. Doug Hershey, welcome back to the program.
This has been great. Always good to be with you.
Doug, when we went to break, I was talking about some of the common misconceptions, misunderstandings about the history of Israel and this issue of the Palestinians. And so I want to kind of lay down the foundation. There was no such place as Palestine. It was Palestina Capitolina, which was a name the Romans gave the land that they conquered as a kind of spit in your face to a reminder of Goliath and the tormenting of the 40 days of Goliath and his family, just really riding roughshod. And it was Rome who always found something that would be rub your nose into something of your history that you don't want to talk about, that you don't want to be reminded of. So this was a name given to them by Rome just some 2,000, 2,100 years ago. This was not something that there was indigenous people. This was not something that was anything more than Rome's way of, let's spit on the people we conquer, and so that's what they did. So it took on its life. England, when Great Britain became sovereign over this part of the Middle East and part of the British Empire, where the sun never set on the British Empire, they adopted and continued with the name Palestine just because the history books showed it. It went from Palestina Capitolina to Palestina to Palestine, just into the Anglican version of it, and it stuck. Once again, not because there was an indigenous people, not because it was named for a people group or that was the official name of the land as given to it by a biblical mandate. So then we come to 1948, and Israel gains its independence, and Israel does something that no other country has ever done, and that is, says, all are welcome here. We don't care whether or not you have acted like an enemy, acted like a friend. If your feet are planted and you live within the borders as defined by the United Nations resolution, we are offering you citizenship in Israel. Friend, enemy, Muslim, Jew, Christian, Bedouin, Druze, we don't care. Do you really think that anybody knows that story?
There's very few, and you've recounted it very, very smoothly and very well, of course. And it's something that is just, I have these conversations very similar to what you just did, and we'll often have it just sort of a blank stare. In fact, I was at Petra and working with a Jordanian guide, and at one point we became a little more friendly. And during lunch, he pulled out a map on his phone, and he was showing me it was a National Geographic map from 1947, and he said, "Look, it says all Palestine through there." And I looked at him and I said, "But it was the British mandate of Palestine." Like, he was talking in reference to a Palestinian people, like it was the nation of Palestine. And I said, "Well, but the British were in charge of the region. It was the British mandate of Palestine from 1917, but then going back 400 years prior, it was the Ottoman Empire. And so, we've just talked about the last 500 years. So tell me again where the Palestinian people are. And he just stared at me like, I mean, this is one of the top Jordanian guides, well trained, smart guy, and there was no animosity. It was just we were having a
Right.
conversation, and it was like, he was a deer in the headlights with just simple conversations and simple facts. And so, not only are Arab nations around there propagating the lie, they're very openly teaching it as fact within their schools, within their universities, and even to their tour guides who are speaking to Westerners. And just simple sort of historical facts seem to be confusing at times.
Well, the claim that these are indigenous people who are being put out, there's an old joke, an old story that the ambassador for the United Nations was getting ready to address the United Nations. He said, "Before I address this esteemed body, I want to clear something up that has been bothering me and the Jewish people for thousands of years." You read in the book of Exodus that Moses was carrying the tablets down the mountain and saw the golden calf, and out of anger threw the stone tablets down and broke them. But we want to set the record straight and say that that was not true, that a Palestinian came along and knocked the tablets from his hands, and the tablets were broken. And of course, immediately the Palestinian representative rapped his gavel and said, "That is untrue. That is a bold-faced lie. We were not at Sinai. We did not do that to Moses. That is just a complete and total lie." And the Israeli ambassador said, "And now that I've made my point."
Excellent. Yeah, and that's one of the things as well. If I refer back to this, to Israel Rising, the book you were just holding up, is that a lot of these photos that were in there, these old black and white photos from 1890, as in fact the oldest photo of Jerusalem is in the book from 1844 up until 1948. Much of it is just barren, empty landscape. And so when people are talking about a Palestinian population or a nation or an economy, my challenge out of these old black and white photos is show me where they are, because in the book there's over 25 locations from all over Israel. There's over 100 photo comparisons, and before even talking about what it looks like now, just looking back, these old black and white photos simply verify what the last 1800 years of eyewitness accounts, which is also in the book as well, quotes from Christians, Muslims, and Jews describing what the land looked like. And obviously most popular, Mark Twain, when he travels through in 1865 and then writes in his journals called Innocent Abroad, that was released in 1867, excuse me. He talks about traveling 10 miles in any direction and not seeing a human habitation, or traveling to Mount Tabor and never seeing another human soul. And so, the real question is, it's either the narrative that we're hearing now is false, or the last couple thousand years of eyewitness accounts in these old black and white photos are all fake news. And so it's obvious which is true. But that's been one of the most profound conversations I've been having as a result of publishing Israel Rising, has been people talking about the Palestinian indigenous population. And I hand them the book and say, there's over 100 black and white photos. Show me where they are, because I can't find them. And that usually ends the conversation.
Right. The truth behind this is that what we would call a Palestinian today, their origin was from Jordan, Syria, and Egypt. That they were anti their own government. They were part of rebellion. They were uprising against King Abdullah, against the rulers of those countries. And during the various wars that these three countries perpetrated upon Israel, these individuals were a part and party to that, but were not welcomed back, told, "No, you're a terrorist. You are not welcome back into this country that you had your citizenship in." Jordan being the predominant one, which when we look at what we call the West Bank, the reason why for the headquarters of Yasser Arafat being in that area is because it's the closest point to the Jordan Rift Valley, to what he would have known as home.
Right.
But he was the one that ordered Tas Seda who tells this story, once an Arafat man. I don't know if you met Taz in Jericho, or you know.
I haven't. I'm familiar with the story, though.
Okay, but he was given the assignment to assassinate King Abdullah so that Yasser Arafat could then bring his ragtag army back into the borders of Jordan and take up their rightful place as Jordanians. When that gate was closed to them, they then formed the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, to say that we refuse to be under Jewish rule. We don't recognize the Jewish state's right to exist, and therefore will never recognize the Jewish state's right to exist. So it kind of brings us to this last peacekeeping mission, this last brokering. I'll take you to the teachings of Bill Koenig, who wrote the book Eye to Eye, that said that every time we get involved in Israel politics, we make a decision about Israel, some natural disaster follows that cost hundreds of billions of dollars. And we look at the eruptions of the volcanoes, we look at the mudslides, we look at the fires, we even look at the earthquakes that are going on, and we see that this proposal was to set up a Palestinian headquarters in Abu Dis, which is not Jerusalem, which is a city in Judea, Samaria, to establish as a Palestinian headquarters. It's been floated before and rejected because every land for peace agreement carries with it the stipulation that you recognize Israel's right to exist, which is what they say is the deal breaker. Then we see this situation in Gaza, which is run by an organization that, if you read in Genesis 6, you're introduced to the people who run Gaza, and that is the Hebrew word Hamas. And Hamas is the Hebrew word for violence. And everybody is startled when I teach Genesis 6 and say, see right there, C-H-A-M-A-Z or A-S, depending on what does that say? Spell it out with me. They go Hamas, and I go, okay, who's ruling over Gaza? And they go, oh my goodness, that means violence. I said, so imagine America, you have this opportunity to vote, Republican, Independent, Democrat, and a representative of the Violence Party. Who would you vote for? And they voted for the Violence Party.
Yeah.
And then they're surprised and shocked that there is an outbreak of violence. Mm-hmm. Help me understand why we should be surprised at what's going on in Gaza. As we see what's going on in Gaza, Doug, do you think we should be surprised at what's happening there?
No, not at all. And it's, you make a very similar point as I make when teaching very similar things. When we're talking about the history of Israel and spiritual dynamics, you know, and the land being renamed, Palestine being renamed after the Philistines, is that, you know, during the time of King David, it's, you know, the Philistines obviously the arch enemies of Israel, and one of their capitals is Gaza, and it's this little strip of land that's right along the Mediterranean. And you know, here we are now that Israel has regathered, that their sort of their arch emesis, you know, of our arch enemy is coming out of Gaza, the exact same little strip of land that seems to be an ongoing thorn in the side and a problem for Israel. You know, there's nothing new under the sun, as the scriptures say. That it's the same enemy, it is the same spiritual dynamic. Again, different people group, but perhaps the same. The same spiritual dynamic that's in play there, and ultimately, as you know, it's you know, it's really comes down to a spiritual battle and who's ruling the land that God's made covenant with.
If you were to say to our audience the one thing that would really change their view of Israel in regards to biblical prophecy, in regards to the destiny of every Christian, what would you say to them in regards to trying to clear up the greatest misunderstanding?
I missed the second part of that question, but as far as the clarifying the biblical prophecy and what's the most significant aspect. Is that correct?
Yes.
I would say just the fact of what is happening in the land in the last 70 years has just simply been proving that God has had a plan all along. He very clearly spelled it out, and it's really not that difficult. He made a covenant. He hasn't backed down from it. He hasn't changed it. It's not only a covenant with a people, but a particular piece of land. And when those people are on that particular piece of land and are at the very least just simply crying out to him, things are happening. And so um, part of the story of the Bible is that God has given this land, and then when they're thrown out for not following the Lord, the land is desolate and empty, and there's no one there. And suddenly, when the Jewish people return and become reestablished as a nation, the same ancient demonic spirits rise up to oppose what God is wanting to do in the earth and what His plan is with the return of the Messiah and gathering all people to Him. And it's really all happening as he very clearly laid out. And so to me, that's one of the most dramatic things is just when God says what He's going to do in Bible prophecy, it's literally happening step by step. And in terms of even things like radical Islam and Palestinians and the violence that has come up, there's a direct correlation between the strengthening, the return of the Jewish people and the strengthening of Israel and the rise of Islamic fundamentalism and a lot of the terrorism that was going on 70, 80 years ago. Even 100 years ago, Islam was basically all but a dead religion. And now that Israel is becoming reestablished in the land that God had promised to them as an everlasting covenant, God is fulfilling His word, then suddenly you have these spiritual dynamics, these evil demonic dynamics that are coming up that even within Islamic groups, whether it's Hamas, Islamic Jihad, ISIS, the Wahhabis, the Muslim Brotherhood, they all don't like each other, but they can all agree on one fact, is that everybody agrees that they need to be killing Christians and Jews. And so to me, just that in itself is a profound spiritual dynamic that's unfolding. But again, this is what the scriptures have laid out for us. And it's really not as difficult once we can turn off the news and turn off some of the propaganda, I suppose you could say, that we're hearing on the news or even online, and just simply get back to the Bible and apply it to what's happening. It's really not difficult to follow.
To the church today that rejects the Jewish presence in Israel, that looks to the Presbyterian Church USA, the constant vote within the Methodist Church, do we divest, do we do this, do we do that? The parable of the sheep and the goats that Jesus preached, where He was talking to a body of believers. There were sheep believers and goat believers, and the goat believers is a reference to Esau, the hairy one. Goats are hairy, sheep are woolly, and that there would be this effort to not take care of the brethren, the least of Jesus' brethren, which are the Jewish people. So if we take a look at 2,000 years of history, we find that there has been a small, the Quakers have been consistently, wonderfully dedicated and devoted to Israel. But aside from them and a select few others, the devotion to the Jews and to the Jewish people, even the complicity in World War II and the Holocaust of the Protestant Church, the Catholic Church, there were none that were not complicit in that. How do we reconcile today with the Bible? Is it just because the Bible is being replaced with the commentary? Is it we've just missed completely the message of Scripture that Jesus was a Jew and that anti-Israel and anti-Jewish is anti-Jesus? Is that too narrow a focus? But to me, as a Jew, I can say that anti-Jewish is anti-Jesus.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's difficult. It's unfortunate to say, but it's difficult to find a 100-year time span in the last 1,800 years where the Christian church has not either directly or just simply turned a blind eye to to Jewish persecution, if not actively being involved in it. And so, much of that starts back in the 2nd century with the guys like Origen and Justin Martyr and some of these early church fathers who, I guess in their day, is simply just looking at current events and saying, well, the temple's been destroyed, the people have been scattered, they killed Jesus, it must all be tied together. And so that type of narrative has really been, as you well know, quite normal up until about 70, 80 years ago. And again, if the nation of Israel has shown us anything, is that God is keeping his promises not because the people are righteous, but simply because he made a promise. And it speaks more about God than it does to the people. But, as far as Christians, again, it's a matter of repentance. I mean, when it comes down to, it's not just simply a changing our view. And like any other aspect in the Bible, it's about trying to apply our lives to the biblical narrative, not the biblical narrative to our lives. And I think that that's where a lot of the problems of even things like the social justice issue that's happening within I can speak of from the Mennonite Church USA. I grew up actually in a Mennonite home in Pennsylvania and understand that world quite well. And Presbyterians and some of those others that are basing their anti-Israel bias based on social media. But again, it's based on a compassion that's not based on a biblical narrative. It's the fact that the God of the universe has made a covenant with a people and a particular piece of land, and if he really is sovereign, then doesn't he have the right to choose whatever people and whatever piece of land for any amount of time that he chooses if he is sovereign? And so, as believers, it's, in my mind, it's a recognition of just, we need to return to the scriptures, actually believe what the Bible says, and where we're wrong, we say, we're wrong. God, please forgive me. I repent. I turn of my ways, and I want to get back on track. It's like that with any aspect of life. And to me, with as often as the Bible talks about Israel, this is a primary element that we've been missing throughout the teachings of the church.
Well, you're exactly right. True words spoken by Doug Hershey, author of the newly released book, Israel Rising, The Land of Israel Reawakens, Ancient Prophecy, Modern Lens, celebrating 70 years, 1948 to 2018. The accompanying calendar and CD, all found at EzraAdventures.com. Doug Hershey, great to catch up with you again. Hope to see you again soon. And good luck with these future trips to Israel and opening the eyes of the church and the body of Messiah to the truth of Scripture and the truth of prophecy. Thank you again for being with us here on Revealing the Truth.
Thanks so much for having me. It's always a joy to spend some time talking with you again and talking about joint friends in Israel and things that we're both doing. I love it.
God bless you, my friend.
All right, take care.
We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.